that as a relatively white person, entirely physically white, but I'm culturally Jewish. So that's a kind of subset because I'm also the target of white supremacist hostility. So I have some circumstantial reasons for empathy and a motivation to understand what it feels like to sit back and watch white supremacists be emboldened and have their vigilantism or their tendencies towards what they perceive as chivalry towards property validated by the findings of a jury who all acquitted, collectively acquitted Carl Rittenhouse, 18-year-old person who falsely described himself as a medic but took an AR-15 to Kenosha during a period of civil unrest when there were protests and riots and property damage because of Jacob Blake being shot 7 times by police officers. Now, people on the right are not only celebrating a young man avoiding prison. Do you know what? I could have sympathy for celebrating somebody avoiding prison, purely abstracted from the circumstances of this case. I should say, yay, not going to prison is a nice thing, particularly if you feel connected to someone. Except the reason why they feel connected to Carl Rittenhouse is because he's a white vigilante. He's someone who chose to arm himself with an extremely lethal weapon and go to a place of heightened tension and then point his weapon at people, shoot the first person who attempted to disarm him 4 times, and then shoot 2 more people who also attempted to disarm what they perceived accurately to be an active shooter. And they died, and Gage Grosshertz nearly lost use of his arm. I mean, his bicep was shot off, essentially. Bullets from AR-15s are pretty destructive creatures. I'm just going to say hi to Bob. Hello, Bob. How are you? Nice to see you. So today was so full of celebration for me because, yes, opposition leader Kevin McCarthy from the House of Representatives made an 8-hour speech to overtake Nancy Pelosi's record for lengthy House speeches. His speech was bluster and deceit against Joe Biden's, the Democratic Party's Build Back Better bill, which expands access to Medicare, reduces the Affordable Care Act payments for people, includes hearing treatments in Medicare for the first time, I believe, legislates preschool for all American 3 to 4-year-olds. And as someone involved in early childhood education and remedial education, that's fantastic because ages 3 and 4 are really critical years in a child's intellectual, emotional, social development, but very much intellectual development. If you have a stimulating, enriched environment there, you are giving America's children so much more of a chance to succeed in life, and you are upholding the value and the worth of the citizens and residents of the United States as befits a humane, successful society. So it's not unreasonable to expect America to fulfill its potential in that way, and this is a step towards the fulfillment of that potential. Oh, we've got Bob and Molly. I'm so happy to see you. I'm glad to be using HAPS today because of its ability to take comments. Yesterday I was using StreamYard because I could share the screen, and HAPS's new iteration doesn't allow me to do that at present. But yeah, StreamYard, I really missed the commenters. So now Molly and Bob can say hello to each other and they can say hello to me. I'm very happy to see you both. So yes, the Build Back Better Act passed the House today. It would have passed last night were it not for Kevin McCarthy's epic speech. Commenters on Twitter have noted that, look, he saved the legislation from being passed late at night and not being really a news story, postponed the passage of that legislation to today so it can be a real news story. And America has the chance to disavow 30 years of Reaganistic ideology, in which Reagan amplified and compounded the intellectual legacy of denying the value of government, saying government essentially should barely exist, should not exist to help the citizens of America, should not provide goods or services, should not legislate improvements to American lives, should not contribute significantly to infrastructure, that everything should be privatized where possible, and that in order to embrace capitalism versus communism, that really involved a surrender of the potential role of government in helping things. So I've seen Americans complain for years that of gridlock in Congress, and just Congress gets disparaged. It proves the value of really digging down to say, let's be more specific about that. What was stopping America from investing in its communities, in its towns, in its infrastructure, and in its people? It was a, a, a philosophy grounded on delusional white supremacist suspicion that if big government helped everybody, that then everybody would be helped, and that would include less deserving Americans. And to be frank, less deserving Americans to racist people often meant non-white, non-Christian people, or any further subsets or subdivisions of that category. So there are people still in Republican-controlled states, but also Republican voters in blue states who will insist that they would rather receive no benefits from the government than have a government that helped everybody, that gave handouts. But they're often in denial about whether or not their handouts come from the government. So I've seen signs that say, keep the government out of my Medicare, as if they're just so deranged in their embrace of these principles that they deny that the government is the fiscal force and the mechanism of delivery of Medicare. And cool photos here as well. Hello. I should know your name by now. It's Christopher, isn't it? Yes, Christopher. Christopher sent me a picture of the moon, which was a really lovely picture, and I should have used it for Halloween. But I'll find a use for it. It was awesome. Thank you for that, Christopher, by the way. Bob points out how you can see the Freedom Tower in New York Center and how Washington had his troops there to watch the British troops in New York. My son came home from school yesterday and was telling me about, did I want to know the story behind the American national anthem? And he was trying to explain, even though he found it difficult to remember the details, but the story of an American man whose friend, a medic, a doctor, was taken hostage by the British, and he went to negotiate for his friend's release, and the release was agreed to, but on the condition that that would occur the next day. And in the meantime, this man, Francis Key Scott, had to stay and watch an attack on Fort Sumter. And so the lyrics to Star Spangled Banner were originally written as a poem, and that poem, the content of that poem was his feelings of relief and gratitude upon seeing that the British had to give up on attacking the fort, that in the morning, by the dawn's early light, you could still see this flag, and that throughout the course of the night during the attack, you could see glimpses of the flag as bombs exploded and gunfire erupted. So that's why it sounds like such a battle song. And we were all singing the national anthem yesterday. My son asked me if I was mocking it because it's a hard song to sing. And so my delivery was probably quite theatrical because I was just struggling. So there's an element almost of self-deprecation that comes into it when you're trying to reach these notes that you can't really. Anyway, I've missed being musical. So I was singing the national anthem yesterday. I may practice it and then sing it again for an audience. And I might do a little bit of singing today before I go, because it's probably just my regulars who are tuned in today and you're used to me singing, and some of you have said appreciative things of my singing at times, which makes me go, there is value in working on one's ability to entertain and to provide music. Uh, Christopher says, yay. um, oh, Bob says his comment is about Chinese tourists. Okay. You were at a revolutionary site the other day and saw some Chinese tourists. And when you walked by, you greeted them in Mandarin. Should have seen them smile. Then I pointed out some points of interest. It made me feel good. Okay, now I understand your comment, Bob. You're right that context would make it make better sense. Uh, that is excellent. You were you were a volunteer tourist guide. You did your country proud, and you were able to greet tourists in their own language, which is awesome. My children would probably be able to do that too because they learned some Mandarin Chinese at school in Singapore when they were there. They're not practicing their Singapore anymore now. They're learning Spanish, which I'm excited about. I feel more emboldened to learn Spanish alongside of them because Chinese Mandarin is hard, given that it involves a whole other alphabet to learn as well if you're going to learn the written language. Whereas Spanish bears some relationship to French, and I've studied French, so I have some familiarity with those romantic languages anyway. So sometimes it helps to feel like you have a head start. Speaking of head starts or their opposite, regressions, Americans have apparently regressed in a collective sense in terms of support for gun control legislation. So 91% of surveyed Democrats are still supportive of gun control legislation, and 81% of Republicans and 54% of independent voters who were polled and are in opposition to such legislation. And I think that might be tied to the fact that 30% of polled Republicans say that they are now of the belief that violence will be necessary to restore America. So you can see the influence of nihilistic style fascist revolutionaries like Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, who will try to inflame their supporters, try to inflame anybody they have intellectual sway with, to burn things down and destroy things, and to destroy systems and institutions and standards, rather than allow for progress to be made in America, progress towards equality, inclusion, diversity, and justice. So what we see as justice, i.e. the rule of law, playing a role of deterring vigilantism, deterring people being judge, jury, and executioner, as Carl Rittenhouse was when he chose to not defend himself with his fists or any kind of proportionate force, when he chose to use this huge, deadly weapon that he'd brought with him on the offensive or even on the defensive, if you agree with the jury. So we may have looked to the rule of law, but I looked to other Black commentators who I follow on Twitter, and they didn't have any hope that the jury would convict Carl Rittenhouse of any charge. I was choosing to hope that he would at least be convicted of illegally possessing a weapon charge. There was one such charge, but the judge dismissed that charge because of some condition of Wisconsin law that specifies the length of barrel that a weapon has to be deemed illegally possessed by someone under the age of 18. So perhaps according to that strict letter of the law, Kyle Rittenhouse wasn't illegally possessing a weapon, or perhaps the prosecution didn't include the right weapons charge. So I'm not sure about that, and I'll continue to try to look for insightful commentary on that point. But it's going to be discouraging to engage with any speculation or commentary about that now. People, conservatives and right-wing people, are very emboldened at the moment to say, sue people for calling Carl Rittenhouse a white supremacist. So let me bring the light of that and at least say here and now, I'm very happy and encouraged and emboldened to call Carl Rittenhouse a white supremacist. The man made a white supremacist hand gesture that's been used to be the OK gesture, but it's been co-opted by white supremacists. Uh, so the OK symbol, and he made that gesture in a bar with his fellow white supremacists, the Proud Boys, people who are now celebrating uh, what they now see as open season on taking weapons of mass death to protest, to deter people who might be tempted to engage in property destruction or just really be at a protest. Because imagine the potentially chilling effect now on Americans' rights to the First Amendment, to the free speech component of the First Amendment, to go to protests, knowing now that a jury is quite likely to acquit um, anyone who murders you. Yes, Randall's here from YouTube and says, haven't watched in a while, good to see you. Thanks, Randall. Bob says he didn't have a permit. Did he have to have a permit? Bob says, I'm wondering if Rittenhouse can be charged federally, crossing state lines with a weapon he wasn't legally allowed to own. Well, apparently Bob didn't cross state lines with a weapon. He crossed state lines and picked up a weapon in Wisconsin because his sister's boyfriend lived in Wisconsin, so he could pick up the weapon within the state of where Kenosha is located. Molly says everyone should know a second language. Bob says yay, that's the only. No, Christopher says yay, and Bob says it's the only Mandarin you know. Yes, Randall says justice denied. Well, a lot of people would agree with that, particularly the families of the two men who were murdered by Kyle Rittenhouse. So good luck with suing anybody for defamation, Kyle Rittenhouse and friends. There's significant evidence of him being a white supremacist, not only his behavior in taking a lethal weapon to a volatile protest situation, protesting the mistreatment and paralysis of a black man by police. And look, I watched the video of Jacob Blake, and the initial news report was that he was merely trying to break up a fight between two women. But on further examination, he was holding a knife, and he admitted to that. And he was going down to retrieve something. He was bending down to retrieve something from underneath his car seat and disobeying police instructions. So it's not that I think there should be a compulsion to comply with police officers under any circumstances. But if you are already armed with one weapon and you've violated a protective order by turning up to somebody's home who's already accused you of raping them, I might be criticized for this, but that's okay. It's okay for me to be criticized. It may well be the case that I am too immersed in a white appeasement mindset. But at this point, my considered opinion is still probably more tolerant of the police actions that day. 7 shots seems excessive for a man in his back. But I think that's the dangers of police carrying weapons, I think. UK police, but it's part of the dangers associated with American gun culture, that so many people have weapons, and that it's when so many people have weapons, so many weapons are also stolen. So people have weapons with licenses, and then people also have weapons obtained from the black market that they don't have licenses for. So police are more in fear for their lives from people drawing weapons, and people are more at risk of being shot by police. And I see it all as being part of a condemnable culture of fetishizing guns and misinterpreting the Second Amendment, which refers to a well-regulated militia, i.e. An unofficial army, when America was relatively too impoverished to pay soldiers in a standing army. and an official standing army. So instead, you were supposed to have a well-regulated militia that should have been legally free to equip themselves with weapons, to the degree that weapons could be purchased at the time. So not AR-15s either, just your standard rifles. And the willful misinterpretation of the Second Amendment to say that it means every man, woman, and child should be able to, well, not child, but that people should readily be able to equip themselves with guns, and that that's codified in the Second Amendment. I think that's an untruth, and these conservative justices on the Supreme Court, specifically Justice Anthony Scalia, codified that into law, that interpretation of the Second Amendment should stand in law. And I think it's wrong, and people sometimes go back on the decisions by the Supreme Court. There was a Dred Scott decision at some point which said slaves didn't have the right to run away and didn't have the right to be independent citizens, or to leave their masters, as it were. So we don't always uphold Second Amendment decisions. Supreme Court decisions are not the final and don't have to be the final word on anything. And the sort of tacit ceasefire that most Americans used to have, to say, okay, respect the sanctity of the Supreme Court, respect that they are a non-partisan body. I think some of the illusion has started to fall with that. The Supreme Court has been more evidently partisan and more evidently stacked with conservative appointees, and that rules have been exploited and bent in order to stack the Supreme Court with conservative appointees, such as Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death being so blatantly taken advantage of, Justice Kavanaugh's history being glossed over so insistently by conservatives. The FBI didn't conduct a proper investigation of all the people who came forward to substantiate the claims of sexual harassment and sexual assault. Justice Kavanaugh was reported to have sexually assaulted a woman at Yale, and all of the corroborators of her story who spoke to the FBI, those tips were not followed up on, and that was a after-the-fact disclosure after Trump was out of office, that the FBI had been instructed to just forward these tips to the White House. The White House, with a vested interest in advancing Kavanaugh's nomination, and then claiming that they were championing a man innocently accused and fueling the fabricated outrage, fueling this manufactured outrage of that how dare the left just willy-nilly accuse innocent men who could cry during their hearing. Just as Carl Rittenhouse also cried during his trial and was celebrated for those tears and that indignation at being accused of doing something that they never meant to do or didn't ever conceivably do. Bob's got to go. Thanks for being here, Bob. If I am going to sing, then maybe I better get on that before I go. Do we sing today? We have a Sip of Water festival. Molly pointed out that the white supremacist gesture means a-hole in American Sign Language, which makes sense. If I look at what's trending, it's Kyle Rittenhouse is trending. George Zimmerman is trending because of the vigilantism. And I guess people were able to move past that. Was there property destruction following the George Zimmerman verdict, the George Zimmerman's acquittal? I don't remember, but I didn't live in America then, and I wasn't as connected to American politics by any stretch of the imagination. The family of Jacob Blake has gathered in support of the family members of the three men Rittenhouse shot when the verdict was announced. Do you know, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, her decision was part of a collective decision. She didn't just decide to risk a jail sentence on her own. There were meetings. People were looking for someone who would be sympathetic to the white community more broadly. And Rosa Parks was a mother and was very respectable, and her being imprisoned for the crime of refusing to give up her seat or refusing to accept the status quo of second-class citizenship for her as an American, refusing to be constrained by the impositions of white supremacy that were systematically being imposed on Black Americans. It was understood that for white people to be able to sympathetically engage, or a critical mass of white people to sympathetically engage with the emotional hardship, to break through the status quo bias, you needed a sympathetic character. And that Rosa Parks was not a character, she was a real person, but she was, to a degree, self-selected. I mean, she had to volunteer to do what she did, but that she was supported by a committee of people who were thinking, yes, you are the right person to do this. Resisting the status quo can be painful, and Donald Trump exploited that pain. That America is being asked to change and being asked to continue to take steps forward towards a more perfect union with all of its citizens, including its Black citizens and its Hispanic citizens. So being asked to take a step forward, being asked to do more, is painful for people whose ego depends on the falsehood of existing American perfection. So not just American exceptionalism, but American perfection, the perfection of the status quo. And there's pain when anybody's asked to accept that their ideas are wrong. People hate to be proved wrong. Some people are less emotionally and intellectually flexible than others. Brett says, rigged from the beginning. Even the Wisconsin governor and lieutenant governor put out statements saying as much. So I don't know what side Brett's on. Brett, what side do you think it was rigged in? I guess you're saying you think it was rigged in favor of Rittenhouse. But I mean, I heard people from conservative points of view argue the exact opposite, that they thought it was rigged against Kyle. So I'm only leaning into the assumption that you are saying it was rigged in favor of Kyle from the fact that the verdict has now occurred. And so I think conservatives have probably stopped saying that it was rigged against Kyle. So we'll see. We'll see what your next remark is. Tap to show. I've got somebody from YouTube who's saying profanities about Black Lives Matter. Black lives certainly matter, and Gustavo Cordoba is one. I shouldn't say their name, should I? Don't dignify them by giving them personal attention. Okay. But yes, the reason why Black Lives Matter is because the lives of all Americans should matter. But some people are at a collective level disfavored by the justice system, disfavored by police behavior, disfavored by house valuationists, people who value a house. It's been shown to raise the value of a property if all signs of Black American habitation are removed. So if you take down your family photos, if you're Black, then your property that you're trying to sell is more likely to receive a higher valuation. Now, these are things established by significant amounts of data, so they're not in contention by people arguing in good faith. Yeah, the YouTubers are very racist today. And I'm being adorably asked if I'm demon-possessed. I'm not demon-possessed. I'm thinking about reading out loud a little bit from a book called The Fire Within Me. I don't remember where I put it. Oh, got it. All right, The Fire Next Time. Bought it secondhand off Amazon. It's really handy to be able to buy secondhand books. So he wrote this book on the 100th. Oh no, he wrote a letter on the 100th anniversary of the emancipation, which I'm presuming means the emancipation of slaves. But I think the first publication date was 1962. I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know which is much worse. And this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I, nor time, nor history will ever forgive them. That they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. One can be, indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death, for that is what most of mankind has been at best, or has been best at since we have heard of man. But remember, most of mankind is not all of mankind. But it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. So I think here he's referring to the knowledge gap that exists between white Americans and black Americans, that black Americans are aware at a very visceral level of the continued um, styles of persecution, neglect, and indifference and hostility that constitutes a lot of the most destructive outcomes of white misconduct. And I'm not going to accuse the jury today of white misconduct. There was one black member of the jury, and I've not been privy to watching all of the videos, but it looks bad. It looks bad to have a man receive no legal deterrence in any way, shape, or form for electing to bring a high-powered weapon, a weapon of not mass destruction, because it's not a nuclear weapon, but a weapon of death that can kill people within the blink of an eye with very little exertion, with a small pull on a trigger, uh, and lie to people about being a medic, and lie about being enrolled in a nursing degree when he was enrolled as an online student but not enrolled in the degree program as a nurse. So we'll see if he continues with his nursing studies. But already two Republican representatives from the House of Representatives have invited Kyle Rittenhouse to apply to be an intern for them. Note, they haven't even invited him to apply. They have offered him the position of interning for them in Congress. So there's that. Now, my dear namesake, says James Baldwin, writing to his nephew, who's presumably also named James Baldwin, these innocent and well-meaning people, your countrymen, have caused you to be born under conditions not very far removed from those described for us by Charles Dickens in the London of more than 100 years ago. I hear the chorus of the innocents screaming, "No, this is not true. How bitter you are." But I am writing this letter to you to try to tell you something about how to handle them. For most of them do not yet really know that you exist. I know the conditions under which you were born, for I was there. Your countrymen were not there and haven't made it yet. Your grandmother was also there, and no one has ever accused her of being bitter. I suggest that the innocents check with her. She isn't hard to find. Your countrymen don't know that she exists either, though she has been working for them all their lives. So I'm thinking that this is reference to all of the work that Black Americans have been doing. And during the years when this was written in 1962 and before then, all of the quiet labor that Black Americans did for white Americans who were propped up in a tiered system of racial hierarchy in which you don't have to do your housework. You can have a maid do your housework for you. And the mechanisms of social mobility are so restricted to Black people that it's unlikely they'll be able to attend university, attend college, and get an education and find a job that's better than being your domestic servant. So you are close to guaranteed a low wage domestic servant that's within your capacity to afford by the tiered feudalistic system of social hierarchical organization in the United States that's systematically excluding Black children from educational excellence, depriving Black schools, first of all, segregating schools and then depriving Black schools of resources, and saying separate but equal when they're not equal. And saying this is just the status quo, this is how it is. If you challenge it, you're bitter, you're ungrateful. Molly notes that she sees Kyle Rittenhouse being emboldened to do more violence. I think he'll be very motivated to keep his nose clean, in that Republicans are embracing him as a hero and want him to be a potent symbol for them of the value of white supremacy. So they want to legitimize white supremacy and white chivalry. To say, no, white people are just sandbagging the line around property protection, that Black people are inherently hostile towards property ownership and to white property ownership because they clearly subscribe to some kind of Old Testament style of justice. And if we don't shoot them, then they might just take things from us and say, you owe it to us because you enslaved us. They are afraid of justice. They are afraid of Black people taking everything from them because of the injustice by which white Americans acquired their wealth initially and have compounded that wealth at an intergenerational level, have used the fortunes acquired from the low-cost labor approach of enslaving other people, of importing people from Africa in chains with a high death rate during a sea voyage, and then owning them and selling them and generating huge wealth from their labor. And then saying, well, that's what's past is past. Don't expect reparations, don't expect justice. And being afraid that some kind of violent justice is what they want. Now, I think most Black Americans would argue that they want to live lives that are free from persecution and from the persecution of economic deprivation and educational deprivation. They want freedom from economic injustice. They want freedom from environmental injustice. They want freedom from having their communities left to contend with lead pipes, because it's not a priority for some white dominant governments to remove lead from pipes in Black dominant communities. So they want freedom from the injustice of neglect and deprivation. They don't want all white people to give up their houses, but white supremacists act like that's a valid fear on their part, and that therefore they have to celebrate Kyle Rittenhouse, otherwise there's a pass for Black people to burn everything down out of vengeance. Molly says, Dav, what is your name on YouTube? I'd like to follow you there. Well, it's simple and very memorable, Molly, because it's the same name as I have on Twitter. The YouTube account is davcat43. Molly notes that we have lead pipes here all over the city. Yes, and you can have lead pipes still in lots of areas of America, and that's a side effect of the white supremacy underpinning Reaganism. So Reagan's political approach was to attract political support by feeding into racist worldviews, by saying, you don't want to pay taxes so that Black welfare queens benefit, do you? No. So clearly, big government is a bad thing. You should oppose taxes. You should oppose big government. You should always argue for small government, and your votes should always go towards people like me who will minimize your tax and minimize government expenditure. So removing lead piping, doing anything that benefits people at a collective level, that doesn't just affect an individual, but affects people who live in a town or a city. That is the legacy of that Reaganistic thought, that Reaganistic hostility to government action. So people are often very conflicted. Republican voters are often very conflicted. They might think, yeah, that's not right that we have lead in our pipes. But they continue to vote for Republicans who reject federal Medicaid. Oops, who, hang on, my earrings fell out. One sec. Two earrings now. Wow, it's so dark. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. I have been talking for a while. Molly notes that consumers are paying for it with a 15% hike in water costs every year. Wow. The infrastructure bill passed, and one of the targets of that is removing lead from America's pipes and acting in opposition to Reaganistic hostility to government action, to actually take government action and to upgrade America's water infrastructure to remove lead pipes or to remove lead from piping, and to create good paying jobs that don't even require a degree, but that are associated with clean energy and clean water and mitigating the harms of climate change, which involve increasingly frequent and severe weather events. So yes, water bill hikes. I think you're saying they relate to the lead piping and the costs of addressing the lead in your piping. Randall notes from that he also has trolls on his YouTube channel and he tries to ignore them. And Eric is here reminding me that his name is Eric from YouTube. His name is I'm Someone Good. It's nice that you're so comfortable in your identity, Eric, that you can say I'm someone good. Pipes are being dug up and replaced. So there you go. I noticed that the governor of, is it Iowa or Ohio? Kim Reynolds. Maybe it's Ohio. You can have a look. You can always check because I'm on my laptop. Governor Kim Reynolds is accused, she's the governor of Iowa, good to know. She's accused of improperly spending $450,000 of federal COVID aid money and expending that instead on salaries of people in her staff, in her inner staff circle. And she claimed, well, they were really thinking about and focusing on COVID, but they couldn't produce a budget to show that their work was related to COVID or to protecting Ohioan constituents from COVID, from the risks of COVID. So she's possibly going to be in trouble for that, although she might just have to pay it back. I hear she also had to pay back $21 million for improper use of federal aid previously to that. So what I want is someone like Pete Buttigieg, who is masterful at addressing the powerful disinformation and the powerful narratives that come out of the multi-tentacled conservative ecosystem of disinformation in America. So not just Fox News, but OAN and Newsmax. And Pete Buttigieg was really good at addressing people who think their values are being met by Republicans. And he points out that if you say you value women and you value children, then women who choose to have abortions in the third trimester are often women, typically always women making very, very difficult medical decisions because they've planned for and expected a baby. They've endured months and months of a pregnancy. They've perhaps painted a room or bought a crib, and they're told that their baby isn't sustainable. So he was great at cutting through the ostensibly humane sounding values of conservatives and pointing out more specific situations that underline the actual inhumanity of preventing women from accessing medical care when they need it in the most difficult moments of their lives, when they're trying to consider, do I decline to have chemotherapy treatment for my cancer that I've just been diagnosed with because I'm also pregnant? Shall I put my own life in jeopardy on the hopes that this child will be able to survive along with me until their birth, and that maybe cancer just takes me after their birth? Or do I hope that my cancer, I just spontaneously recover from the cancer? And if I already have children, how do I feel about gambling with the prospects of their mother's life on the off chance that this particular sibling will survive. What do I do, and what's most in line with my values, and what's most sensible given the prognosis of my diagnosis? All of these really complicated decisions. And conservative voters who cling to the idea of we're pro-life are often ignoring those specifics. So Pete Buttigieg was really talented at bringing up those specifics in a non-confrontational way, in a way that honored the values that Republicans often claim to have. So we might be able to say, look, we see through you. There's a hypocrisy there. You say you support life, but you vote for politicians who deny government aid to new families, and you deny government aid to babies, and you deny government aid to preschool or establishing childcare. And Republicans would say, well, it's not hypocritical. That's perfectly consistent. We say no to murder and no to government help. What's not to understand? So calling them hypocrites doesn't help to cause them to reconsider their position. It just highlights that you're at odds with them. So we don't want to exert too much of our energy in just gratifying ourselves intellectually by asserting how much better we are than our political opponents. That just is an adversarial dynamic, and we want to say, look, so we'll try to understand you and say, you support life, and we honestly think that governments have a place in supporting the citizens and the residents of America, and that everybody benefits if new mothers have adequate support during their pregnancy, and if 3 and 4 year olds have the opportunity to attend quality childcare and preschool, regardless of their lot in life. And we don't believe in maintaining some kind of feudal hierarchy so that you can have cheap hired help who have no options and whose children have no options. If you're genuinely pro-life, you'll consider that government help is not as automatically worthy of disdain as you might have heard said over and over again. Next year, insulin will go to $35 a month. So remind people that know someone that needs the meds that every Republican voted against it. Yes, it is amazing that insulin medication will now no longer be a death sentence for people who can't afford the hundreds of dollars a month. There will be less likely to be deaths of people who ration out their insulin medication and so expose themselves to insulin spikes that can cause them to go into seizures and to die. And yes, it's important to remind people that Republicans all voted against it because they all claim that government shouldn't take action to help people, but they all fail to be honest with the public about how much subsidies various fossil fuel energy companies get per. We should be figuring that out so we can work it easily into conversation. How much per person American taxpayers pay to support fossil fuel companies and the corporate owners of fossil fuel companies. Randy says he's got a YouTube group called Rantin' Randy's Rant, the True Patriots group, twice a week. That does sound good, Randy, because reclaiming patriotism back from conservatives who seem to be trying to legitimize violence and a violent takeover of the government and legitimize spreading falsities about the outcome of the election, and to pretend that there has never been any investigation of Trump's claims of election theft when there were 61 court cases that Trump lost. So Molly says, thanks, Randall, as well. All right, folks, singing. I'm going to sing one song before I go. And I hope that my husband doesn't complain. Oh, and have a drink of water as well. Okay. Well, that's Can you hear that? That's the background music of the song I'm going to sing. Oh, and it's from Hamilton, and it's a song from King George reproaching Americans for rejecting his love, rejecting being an outpost of the British Empire. So it's kind of a patriotic American song to sing in that it's inherently mocking the concept of monarchic hurt feelings at America leaving. And America essentially left the British Empire over tax disputes. They didn't want to be taxed to pay for British expenditures in defending America from attacks. But the principle of it was not that big government is wrong, but that America should have autonomy and independence. And that's laudable. The tax motivation is less discussed probably in American history classes, but we can learn that for ourselves on our own time. And I'm thinking of starting a parent group now that I live in America. Uh, Something like Parents for Inclusion and Accurate Teaching of History. Maybe Parents for Inclusion and Kindness, or pick, because you have to pick a side. Are you with the people who want to burn the books and take books out of the library and complain that accurate American history is being dealt with at all, or that there are inclusion and diversity elements in the curriculum, or that there's inclusion and diversity training for teachers? Do you want to complain about that, or do you want to be on the side of decency, of recognizing that, yes, towards a more perfect union means towards being more inclusive of non-white Americans, non-Christian Americans, and migrants, and everyone. Right. Oh, here we go, singing. You say the price of my love's not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back, soon you'll see. You'll remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You'll remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. But when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. You say our love is draining and you can't go on. You'll be the one complaining when I am gone. And no, don't change the subject, 'cause you're my favorite subject. My sweet, submissive subject. My loyal, royal subject. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'll be back before I will fight the fight and win the war for your love, for your praise, and I'll love you till my dying days. When you're gone, I'll go mad, so don't throw away this thing we have, 'cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da da da. Everybody. Da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya. Christopher. Oh. Oh, should I do another one? I do. Boy, you got me hopeless. Look into your eyes and the sky's the limit. I'm hopeless. Down for the count and I'm drowning in 'em. I've never been the type to try and grab the spotlight at a revel with some rebels on a hot night. My sister as she dazzling the room. You walked in and my heart went boom. Catch your eye from the side of the ballroom. Everybody's dancing and the band's top volume. To the rhythm as we walk down. Grab my sister and whisper, you're this one's mine. Ooh, ooh. My sister made her way across the room. Ooh, like I'm nervous thinking what she's gonna do. Ooh, I'm thinking I'm through. Back. Oh, this song is too high for me. Down for the count and I'm drowning in 'em. Well, that just happened to be the song that played next, but it is not a song that I'm really capable of singing. Philippa Sue, who played Eliza Hamilton in the musical Hamilton, has a far higher range than I do, which is why I sing the male song by, what's his face? Who sings the other one I sang? Ooh. Jonathan Groff sang the King George song, You'll Be Back. But yes, Christopher's happy I sang. Thank you, Christopher. Right now I'm paying $145 a month, says Molly, with a prescription plan card. Glucose test strips aren't even covered because they aren't a medication. That's another $162 a month. That's extraordinary. Well, I look forward to next year when they'll be less expensive. That's such a huge cost. Wow. Relative to other societies. But Molly also notes that a lot of Republicans that voted against the infrastructure bill have nevertheless been boasting to their constituents about the improvements that their states will get, even though they voted against the bill. So yes, I hope it gets a lot of attention, that people pay them out, or that people acknowledge the gulf. Gulf is a good word, and I'm going to write it down. Gulf. The gulf between their anti-tax rhetoric and the actuality of what Democrats are delivering to the American people. The valuable things that governments are uniquely positioned to be able to give to the American people. Uniquely positioned. I've got to say that because there's so much intellectual hostility that's been irrationally built up by Republican rhetoric over the years, not just delivered from Republicans in office, but delivered from this very powerful and potent media disinformation ecosphere, the Fox network. Shall we go, darling? You gonna come? I'm coming. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for being with me today. I'll just scroll down to see if there's any final comments. Cool photo was Molly told him it was his lucky day. Nice. And Molly said the costs have gone up 10 years what they were 5 years ago. Well, that's extraordinary. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Bob and Randall and anybody else who tuned in today. I so much appreciate your time and attention and encouragement over the years. And look, I might not have instantly found my way when I came to the US of like some media station picking me up and running with me. Maybe if we moved to a different location. My husband is interviewing for it. Doesn't matter what my husband's doing. Regardless of where we live, I will find my own way because I have a drive still to connect with Americans, entertain, and bring history to life, and to do things like keep reading little bits of James Baldwin and to educate myself. What is that? Oh, it's my watch. Molly says I'm in a good place. I am. Do you know what? I'm in the state with the lowest gun violence, so this is probably the best.